Despite advantages in manpower, weaponry, and transportation, a victory in the Civil War was far from assured for the Union. In fact, the Confederacy won many battles in the first 2 years of the conflict. Much of that was due to the Union's flawed military leadership. President Lincoln, hesitant due to his own lack of military experience, went through several generals in chief in his search for the right strategist. Winfield Scott was too old to lead troops in the field. George McClellan was overly cautious, and Henry Halleck proved to be ineffective. In March of 1864, with the presidential election looming, Lincoln turned to Ulysses S. Grant, an unremarkable leader who had earned numerous Union victories, to gain control of the western river valleys. Lincoln said of Grant,
"I can't spare this man. He fat."
"Our objectives today are to explain why Lincoln chose Grant to lead the Union Army, describe various technologies essential to the war, describe major events that occurred later in the Civil War and their effects, and describe Lee's surrender to Grant to end the war." While Grant's military strategies and willingness to engage in battle helped turn the war for the Union, new technology also proved vital to success. Keep in mind that most factories were located in the North, a huge advantage in creating weapons and supplies. Most new technology was developed by and for the Union. One was a mini ball, a hollow-based projectile fired from muskets used by both sides. Combined with rifling or spiral grooves inside a gun barrel, weapons became much more accurate and deadly at longer distances. Another advance was the Gatling gun, the first rapid-firing weapon that used multiple barrels. It was a predecessor to modern machine guns. Other important developments include the telegraph. The Union used it for long-distance communication regarding military strategy. Photography was another new invention. Images from the war were captured forever by individuals such as Matthew Brady. It may surprise you to know that both sides used aerial reconnaissance during the war to observe opposing troops, survey the land, and plot strategy. Hot air balloons would be tethered and raised up to 1,000 feet in height to gain information. And submarines? Yes, both sides used those during the war as well. While their impact wasn't large, man-powered subs were used and notable for their future importance in warfare. A turning point in the war occurred at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a Union victory that ended any further Confederate plans to invade the North. The defeat proved especially costly to the Confederates and signaled a beginning of the end to the conflict. It's believed that 50,000 men died at Gettysburg, the bloodiest battle of the war. Lincoln returned there months later to dedicate a national cemetery to memorialize the deceased Union soldiers. We'll take a look at his Gettysburg address in the PDF. When Grant took command of the Union Army in spring 1864, he validated Lincoln's praise by taking the fight to the Confederate Army. Later that year, a victory in Chattanooga, Tennessee, decimated Confederate railroad lines for supplies, captured the Tennessee River, and again split the South. The following spring, Grant kicked off his overland campaign, battling Lee and his troops to a draw in a dense wilderness in central Virginia. A month later, Grant began a siege to capture Petersburg, Virginia, an important junction for several Southern railroads that carried supplies into Richmond. Near the end of 1864, sensing the chance to bring the war to an end, Grant devised a two-part plan. Grant took his forces north, engaging Lee and his troops and wearing down the main force of the Confederate Army. He sent trusted ally and fellow Union General William T. Sherman and his forces south on a different mission. As Grant went north to face Lee, Sherman was to split the South, starting with Atlanta. Union troops captured the city, then turned its sights towards Savannah, one of the South's largest cities. 1 month later, Sherman and his troops arrived. Savannah, having witnessed the devastation inflicted on the Georgia countryside, surrendered to the Union forces without a fight. The term for such destruction is total warfare, a tactic in which civilian property and resources are not excluded from fighting. In fact, Union troops took supplies from farms and businesses during their march to the sea. Some called it scorched earth, as Union troops destroyed military targets, as well as industry, infrastructure such as railroads and bridges, and even civilian property along the way. The devastation was also intended to motivate Southerners to abandon their cause. And with that mission accomplished, Sherman now took his troops north to join Grant. At that point, events happened quickly. Sherman conquered several southern cities during his journey through the Carolinas to join Grant's troops. In April 1865, Union troops captured Richmond, the Confederate capital. As Lee attempted to move his troops west to join up with other Confederates, his path was blocked by Grant's Union army. Realizing what this meant, Lee requested to meet with Grant. The meeting took place in a farmhouse in the small town of Appomattox Court House, Virginia. It's there on April 12th that Lee formally surrendered to Grant. And as the bulk of the Union army disbanded, Grant ordered the Southerners to simply go home. The fighting had ended. Other skirmishes and minor battles occurred over the next few weeks, but with Lee's surrender, the Civil War was basically over. More than 600,000 Americans died in the war, a total which included almost 10% of the South's male population. A vast majority of the fighting had taken place in the South, meaning crops were uprooted, barns and fences were burned, and infrastructure such as roads, canals, railroads, and bridges were destroyed. Travel was difficult, slow, and expensive, except by river. Repairs would be costly. In particular, the Southern economy was in shambles. Confederate money could no longer be used. Large farms and plantations would transition to paying their workers, restructuring their businesses, and many laborers would leave if they could. It was as if much of the South and its culture had been erased. All that remained of the Confederacy was debt and reminders of its defeat. How do you think the destruction in the South will affect its residents as it rejoins the Union? 4 years after it began, the Civil War ended in Virginia, the same state where the first major battle occurred. Indeed, more battles were fought in Virginia than any other state. Lincoln chose Grant, who lacked recognition and fame but had proven effective. Lincoln's faith in Grant was rewarded as the Union general's tactics and tenacity proved instrumental in the Union win. Technological advances were important as well. Inventions such as the mini-ball, rifled musket barrels, the Gatling gun, and the telegraph all helped the Union to victory. After bloodshed at events such as Gettysburg, Sherman's march to the sea, and the Overland Campaign, Grant maintained the pressure on Lee, forcing his peaceful surrender at Appomattox Court House. The United States was whole again. Well, sort of. Next time, we'll see what happens as lawmakers attempt to put the pieces back together and change the Constitution. Many challenges awaited President Lincoln and the war-torn nation, including some that were completely unexpected. Until then, historians, remember to always be clever. Hey, hey!